Away we go. Great. I think we're recording. So, let's make a start and hope that works.
All
So,
right.
everybody, welcome to the first Crewe Ward Missionary Memories podcast, and with me, Christian Lucas, and also Jack, who is not here, but who will be assisting me in providing these podcasts. He's going to do all the techie stuff. So, just to give everybody a little bit of background, what's going on. So I had a friend who was from my mission who decided that he was going to do a podcast. And this podcast was going to be inviting all the missionaries in his area just to kind of go over their mission, their experience, what they're doing now. And it's just a great trip down memory lane, both for the person that's doing it and for people that are listening. Now, what I didn't recognize was the appeal that this would have for family, friends, non-members. It's been really successful. So he's done about 41 podcasts, and I've just stolen his idea. So a bit of a shout out to Zach Hewlett and his trainer Jack for stealing their idea. Now they got a catchy Zach and Jack name, but we're just going to go for Crewe Ward Missionary Podcasts and go from there. So we got our first guest. We've got Brother Brett Boydell of the Crewe Ward, funnily enough. Who's going to be coming to share his stories. Now, Brett, you were someone that I wanted to interview first, simply because you and I have a shared missionary experience a little bit, I think. So you want to go ahead and tell us when you served, where you served?
So I served in the Scotland Edinburgh mission from 1994 to 96, which is now rather a long time ago. But the memories are still strong. And so, yes, we served in the same mission.
Yeah. So, well, you were there 12 years before. So it was 2006 to 2008. So I got there in July. So it was nice and sunny when I got to the MTC. And then I went to my first area, it was Aberdeen. It was a lot less sunny by the time I got there.
Well, I got on my mission in October. I went on my mission on the 10th of October because I was 19 on the 5th of October. And I wasn't allowed to actually go before I was 19. So I had to wait until my birthday, and then literally entered the MTC in London in those days to do a 2.5 weeks in the London MTC, which is, of course, in what was the old Pears Mansion next to the London Temple, the original building, which is where the London Temple site was. That was our MTC. It was 26 of us, which was the biggest group they'd had ever.
Pretty old school. I remember, I think my dad went there. I think my dad went
yeah,
to the MTC.
It was the only British MTC until Preston was built.
Fantastic.
But yeah, very, very, very wonderful experience there, and beautiful old Tudor building as well.
So I don't know, are you familiar with the format of how this is going to go?
Not at all.
Well, I'll help you along. So what we'll do is first we're going to, because this will go out to, Jack actually told me that he'd spoken to you and about keeping in touch with former companions. And he said that they would ask you if you were going to keep in touch with them, and you would just say no.
No.
Is that true?
So people, as I would move from area to area as a missionary, now you've got to realize, I'm a futurist. So I live very much about what's ahead of me. And my whole career and life has always been about the future. And so I'm not particularly good at looking backwards and being nostalgic. So people used to say, like, "Are you going to keep in touch?" And I'd be like, probably not.
Well, I suppose that you didn't
and they'd be like, but you have to.
And you didn't anticipate the future of Facebook and social media.
Yeah, that's true. And so the reality is I guess I have kept in contact with quite a few of my companions because of Facebook and what have you. I occasionally speak to them. In fact, a guy that I actually was never companions with, but I was in a missionary apartment with twice. And I saw him after my mission, went and spent some time with him as well over in the States. He actually contacted me only a few months ago to say he was going to be in London and was I going to be around. So occasionally from time to time, I do speak to missionaries that I'm on Facebook with, but interestingly, no one from Scotland that I actually that I actually taught. So no, I did say, I was very honest that I'm not very good at writing. People say, well, are you going to write? And I barely wrote to my mum and dad on my mission. So I was quite honest and said, probably not.
So this can be like the catching up for all those years that you never caught up with everybody. So the format is going to be this. So we'll go right to the beginning, kind of your decision to serve. We want to know all about the story of you receiving your call, because of course in those days, old school days, came through the post and not on an email. That whole experience that you got from that, and then the MTC. And then we're going to switch from the MTC and we'll go all the way. I'll remind you, don't worry. We'll go all the way to now, what you've done since your mission, just a little bit of a summary from that. Mm-hmm. And then we'll go through the mission, who you served with, some areas that you were at, and some stories to share. And the time will be completely yours. So yeah, tell us about your decision to serve and receiving your call.
So I grew up in the church. My parents are both converts to the church, so neither my mum or dad had the opportunity when they were younger to serve a mission, even though actually they both joined as teenagers. My dad joined the church in Bolton, and in those days you just went and got a job at 16 and got an apprenticeship and earned some money and got married, and that's exactly what he did. So but I was raised in the church, always kind of had this goal of wanting to be a missionary, spent a lot of time with missionaries. My dad served in various leadership positions, which meant that missionaries were always in our home. They were always a very positive influence and somebody that I always looked up to. So having grown up in the church, whilst I probably didn't have any written goal or anything, if somebody had said, do you plan on serving a mission? I'd have probably quite jovially, as a youth, said, like, yeah, sure. It was certainly not something I had discounted or anything else. So it was always there as certainly something that I was working towards. But actually my older brother had decided he didn't want to serve a mission and went and worked away, moved out of our home, went and worked in Wales, was working as a youth hostel assistant and going climbing, and then went and spent some time actually in the States and in Utah, and then of course ended up in an apartment with 4 returned missionaries, and lo and behold, shortly thereafter decided he did want to go on a mission, which was lots of fun for my parents who'd spent the money that they've been saving. But I guess that was like 1 year before I turned 19. And I think that really crystallized for me, do I want to serve a mission? Am I preparing sufficiently? And if I'm not, what am I going to do to really buck up my ideas? So I kind of made the decision that this was the right thing for me, that I really wanted to serve the Lord. I had felt the power of the atonement in my life. I'd felt the power of the Spirit in my life. I'd come to a realization through challenging everything that I was raised to believe, and putting Moroni's challenge to the test. I'd established my own testimony. Even though growing up in the church, I think I had felt the Spirit on a number of occasions. I'd had some quite spiritual experiences as a young man, but that didn't mean I was perfect in any way, or didn't make stupid decisions as a teenager. So I went to see my bishop and I said, look, I need to prepare. I need to start putting things in place. And what do I need to do? And so he gave me that guidance. He gave me a goal of a monetary value that he expected me to save personally. I was working as well as a student. And so he'd said, I know your parents have, money put aside, but you're not going until you've sacrificed. And so he gave me some challenges. There were some things that I needed to get better at, to start studying and increasing. And I was continuing with seminary and everything. So it was my choice entirely. My mum and dad, despite always wanting me to serve a mission, never actually told me that I was going to, or that I should. I think in that way, they knew me quite well, that if it was my idea, that would be the better scenario. And so it was completely my doing. I set the appointments with the bishop. I set my interviews up, and they supported me all along. But it was very much, I was there because I decided I wanted to. And in fact, because of the academic year, starting in October, I was actually trying to leave early when I was 18, and I requested to leave early. But in those days, you needed to be 19. So as I said, 5 days after I turned 19, I entered the MTC. And was there. And so I actually put my papers in at the same time of two of my friends. One was in my ward in Harrogate, and the other one was in Leeds. And my friend in Leeds got sent to the Ivory Coast of Africa. My friend in my ward got sent to New York, and I got sent to the Scotland Edinburgh mission. And I remember receiving the letter. I was at home by myself. And all the scenes that I'd ever seen of people opening up the letters in front of their whole family just churned my stomach. So I was like, I'll just open it. So I was sat in my living room. The letter came in. I went, oh, I think I know what that is. So I opened it. Chuckled to myself, noting that I was living in the Leeds stake, which was the Leeds mission, which was the bordering mission to Scotland.
Yeah.
I just chuckled to myself, and despite having, as a child, saying I want to serve my mission in Hawaii, I think I'd humbled myself sufficiently that I'd recognized that I was requesting to go on a mission. This was my idea, something I wanted to do, and it was the Lord's will as to where I had gone. I had already received a testimony that where you are sent is where you are meant to be. And so in reality, I just didn't mind where I was going.
We've had a lot of the American missionaries that have done these podcasts, and they open it up and they're going to the Scotland Edinburgh mission, and they're all very excited. They got no idea where it is. They got to check on a map and stuff like that. And as soon as you get an English missionary on the podcast, it's like the complete opposite. They know exactly where it is, and they're really disappointed. But when I opened mine, I cried because it was the last place I wanted to go. But I think sometimes it's like a little. Well, for you, obviously not. For me, it was definitely a trial of faith. It's like, okay, you've decided to go. I'm going to send you to the last place you want to go. Are you still going? And that for me was a trial of faith. But you were happy with that. You were wherever the Lord was going to send you, you were happy.
Yeah, it didn't bother me at all, to be honest. I know a lot of my friends were just like, ooh, because of course, living in northern England, you only associate going further north with colder and more rain.
Yeah.
And so
and less teeth.
Yeah. And so I didn't really bother me at all. My older brother had been sent from Utah. He applied for his mission in Utah and was sent to the Manchester mission. His greeny area was Bolton, which is where my parents grew up and my grandparents lived. But things happened in those areas where he needed to be there. And so I had already had a clear confirmation that if the Lord wants me to go to Manchester, I'll go to Manchester. I don't care. And it was okay with me, to be honest, wherever I went. I wasn't super skilled in any language skills. So I figured, I thought that an English-speaking mission would be a little easier.
Yeah.
Not realizing that I was going to get sent straight into darkest Glasgow, so there wasn't that much English being spoken.
Not English. So, on another thought from just what you've been saying, so was there any kickback from your mother that she wasn't there when you opened the call?
No, in fact, I think I phoned my mum at her work and said, I've got the mission calls here. And she said, oh, fantastic. Are you going to wait? And I said, no, I think I'm just going to open it.
Brilliant.
You have to realize I was a very, very laid back teenager.
Yeah.
And so I was pretty chilled. I did the same thing with my exam results and everything else. This whole hype around the location, all that wasn't really me. So I was very happy to receive the call. I told everybody where I was going. Most people were all like, ooh, thinking I would be disappointed, but in reality, I was completely fine with it.
So you received the call, you were 18 years old. How long before the call until you were going?
I think I had just 2 months. So my call came from Howard W. Hunter, who was president at the time and was not prophet for very long. So there's not very many people with a mission call from Howard W. Hunter. And I think I just had 2 months. I think I received it probably in the summer, like August time. And then I had a couple of months to work, earn money. I'd finished my college course in the July. So I just focused and earned some money, working various jobs until I could go in the October, on 10th of October.
Very good. So go on then, take us to your London MTC experience.
So the London MTC was really a lot of fun. I lived off my brother's experience a year before, and I think there was about 12 or 13 people in his group. And so when I got there, and there was like 25, and my first companion was from Sweden, Elder Jules Sorensen, and he was a super nice guy, really good character, had very confident English, as most Swedish do in reality. There was actually two guys, and they were both in the same dorm. We had dorms at that time, and there was 4 of us in the dorm. And so there was Elder Malm, I think his name was, and Elder Jules Sorensen, and both fantastic missionaries from Sweden. And then there was another English guy in there as well. And so, yeah, we had a fantastic experience. The MTC president and his wife were both fantastic. For me, it was a very, very intense experience. I'd never spent, 12 hours a day studying the gospel. I didn't have to worry about a language, because theoretically I knew the language. So it was just about learning how to be a missionary, and in reality, really learning the gospel. What was great is there was quite a few converts who were, going on missions. They had only been members of the church for maybe a year, and from all over Europe. So some of them were very inexperienced as church members, but they were very experienced with the process of missionary work, because they had lived it and been through that process. And so I learned a lot from them, actually. And I remember, it's probably a terrible thing to admit, but I remember we had to take a little bit of a test just to see if we'd actually learned anything, the 10 days or 12 days or whatever it was that we were there. And I remember them talking about things like the threefold mission of the church, and me turning to somebody and going, this is really good, isn't it? And all these converts knew everything. And I, despite having grown up in the church, just hadn't retained the lessons that had clearly been taught by poor teachers who had invested in me in vain. But my testimony was strengthened incredibly. The intensity of the spirit in the MTC for me was something that was really new. Just how much I was learning, how much I was able to progress in such a short space of time. In reality, not really having a clue how to be a missionary, but certainly having the most intense spiritual experience of my life. And of course, being so close to the temple, we got to go to the temple a couple of times as well. And I had only been able to go to the temple, I think, twice before that for endowments. And so it was all fairly new. And there was people from Russia who actually took out their endowments when they came to the MTC. There were some people that received their patriarchal blessings in the MTC because they were in a part of the world where they had no patriarch and they had no temple. And so we were kind of all learning together. And for me, that was also a really spiritual experience. I learned to love the endowment session in the MTC, because not just because I probably actually started to understand it and become more comfortable with it, but because you were in that spiritual place to then attend the temple, when you were pretty much living with the Spirit constantly, was hugely insightful. And I grew a great love of the temple as a result.
Fantastic. So did you have any American missionaries in the MTC, or were they in Provo and would come over from Provo?
So all the American missionaries were in Provo, and then we met them at Heathrow Airport.
Yeah.
So it's actually the first time I'd ever been on an aeroplane. I flew from Heathrow to Edinburgh.
Toe in the water of the airplane travel.
Yeah, with a very, very kind of short whoop up and then straight down again.
So how long were you in the MTC for?
So I was trying to remember this. I think I was in there for about 2 weeks. We did training, and then we just did 2 weeks, and then we met the missionaries. We met everybody else that was going into the Scotland Edinburgh mission from the States, and then we all flew in together. It was quite a big group that I was with, actually. There was probably about 20 of us that arrived in my group, and some really good guys. Of course, we immediately started chatting to all the guys from America and stuff and getting to know them as well, and then flew in, spent the night at the mission home.
All 20 of you.
Which is, sorry?
All 20 of you spent the night at the mission home.
Yeah, as I remember.
That's
I don't remember going anywhere else. So yeah, from what I can remember, we all spent the night there. And so we came in. We went straight to the bank. First thing we did when we landed was we went straight to the bank to set up bank accounts. But of course, I already had a British bank account, so that was done. So the first thing that they did, one of the assistants said, "Okay, you don't need to set it up, so you come with me. Let's go street contacting."
Cool. Right, we're going to get there. So that was your MTC experience. That's how you got there, which is great. So you had 28. We had 64 in mine, and that was the biggest in the Preston MTC. We were there for 12 days, and train travel from Preston to Edinburgh, which is good. So for all those folk that don't know, and I don't know actually, kind of your entire history, but just give us a quick whistle-stop tour over the next few minutes from the time you left. So you left in 96?
I finished my mission in 96, yeah.
Yep, so from 96 to 2022, it's plenty of years. What was that, 26 years? 26 years. So what's happened in the last 26 years?
When I got back from my mission, I had, of course, just missed the start of an academic year. I'd been told that I could go home a month early, but I just didn't want to. So effectively, I got home and I moved back to my house for one day that I grew up in, the house in Harrogate. My parents moved out a day after I got home. They were renting our house out, moving out into the countryside, having a house built. So they were in a static caravan while they were having a house built. So I came home, was in my house for one day, then moved out again, went and stayed in a static caravan for like a week in the middle of nowhere, realized this wasn't going to work very well. And so then moved out again a week after that and went and lodged with some members in Harrogate Ward while I was working just in Pizza Hut, earning some money and going to college, working up my portfolio so that I could then apply for university for the next academic year. So I just earned some money. I received 4 callings in 4 months when I got home. They were very, very keen to keep me busy.
Yeah.
But I had, I gained, I guess, some skills that could be put to use. So I was, I think I was on the eldest quorum presidency. I was the young single adult president, whatever it was back then. I was on the mission presidency. And I was teaching the YSA Sunday school. So they kept me busy. It was fun. And I had lots going on. But effectively, I secured a place at university for the following academic year. And then I had 3 months where I went and traveled the States. So I went and saw my brother in Arizona and then went and did some touring, seeing quite a few friends and old companions. I went to a mission reunion. So that was the first thing I did, like the first year. Then I went to university in Coventry where I met Andy, who I married pretty much a year later, whilst I was studying. So that was not that was a fantastic experience. And then a year after that, our daughter Lois decided she wanted to make an appearance a lot earlier than scheduled.
Yeah.
And so she came along a year after that, or a year and a bit after that, whilst I was still at university in my third year. But in my third year, 6 months after Lois was born, I had a placement, like a sandwich for my degree. It was a 4-year degree with a sandwich. And so I was lucky enough to get a place at Bentley Motor Cars for a 6-month summer internship, which turned into a 22-year job. So I ended up doing 6 months, being very successful while I was there, and studying as a car designer. I had gone into Bentley Motors just as there was a massive shift, and they were bringing out kind of a whole new range of cars, and everything was changing. So I was lucky enough to be offered a job to be sponsored for my final year. So I actually never went full-time back to university. I did my final year thesis and my final year project all from Bentley. And I went to university. I had to go about 6 times just for assessments and the odd lecture. But it was the first time, this was an amazing testimony builder, that although I had theoretically sacrificed an academic year so that I could fulfill my mission and focus on my mission while I was there, the Lord compensated big time.
Yeah.
I got a job a year earlier than I should have. And I got a job, which 5% of the student population that study car design actually get jobs as car designers. And I was sponsored for my final year, which of course, because I was married and we had Lois, was a huge blessing to be able to receive money. We could live. I got a car through work. They sponsored me through the whole thing, and of course I was able to complete my degree as well, and then was automatically given a job.
Yeah. Not any.
So
that's a pretty prestigious job, right? It's not like a Ford or a Skoda or a Lada at the time.
No,
that's a good job.
That's a very good job. And so that was just a huge blessing. And my boss at the time kind of said, look, I need you to work during the day. I've got projects I need you to deliver. And then you do your thesis in the evening. So I used to go to work from like 8 till 5. I used to live just around the corner from Bentley. So I used to be able to walk home. I used to have dinner, give Lois a bath, put her in bed, and then go back to work and write my thesis for the rest of the evening until about 11. That was my normal life. But for me it worked just fantastically. And then they sponsored me, and I made my whole my kind of degree project with them, and they said, okay, with a couple of months to go, just focus on that entirely. So that was a huge blessing. And I've been at Bentley ever since. So I was able to work my way through and gain promotions and become the head of interior design there until very recently, where I'm just about to move into a different position within a different company. But I've also, whilst being here, we've then had 3 more children. After Lois, we've had Kieran, we've had Rosie, and we've had Faith. We were able to buy a house, very early on, fortunately, in Haslington, which is the village we still live in. And I've been able to serve in quite a lot of capacities within the Newcastle-under-Lyme stake and the Crewe ward. I guess most notably, I was able to serve as the bishop in Crewe ward and the stake president for Newcastle-under-Lyme.
Yeah, you've been
for 9 years.
You've been my bishop and my stake president, and been around ever since I can remember. And I guess it was good for Mandy as well, I imagine, because of all the car companies in the world, you end up going to that one in the town where she grew up, and she was familiar with everybody in the area and the members in the ward, and kind of came back home.
Yeah, and that's why I'd initially gone for the placement, because Mandy's sister was still living in Crewe, and I thought, okay, if I go there, then she's got like a network, so I can go and work, but she's got somebody to help her and what have you. So that's why I applied for. In those days, it was Rolls-Royce and Bentley.
Yeah.
It was still Rolls-Royce, and so they weren't a super cutting edge company in those days, because they were really quite old fuddy-duddy cars in those days. And nothing had come out from the takeover with Volkswagen yet. And I walked into the studio, in 2000, and the Continental GT was a clay model, full-size clay model in the middle of the design studio. And I was like, oh, this could work out well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was there. It was fantastic timing, a massive blessing, and a real testimony to me that, as you make sacrifices, the Lord compensates and puts everything in place. Yeah. So it was I've been able to work consistently, be able to raise a family here. With Mandy and our 4 children, we have a wonderful home. But I've also loved serving in Crewe ward. It's just a fabulous ward. But also the Newcastle-under-Lyme stake, which is geographically a fairly good-sized stake, as it takes in 3 counties in England and a portion of Wales.
Yeah.
But those callings and the callings that I've held, since I've returned from my mission, I've always been put to work everywhere I went. Like I say, when I got home, I had 4 callings. Then I went to university, and I was young men's president and early morning seminary teacher, which was also quite a lot in those days. But I've just always really enjoyed serving and the opportunities that come from service. And then, when we moved to Crewe, I was also given various callings. And always had the opportunity to serve, and enjoyed always doing missionary work. I was very fortunate when I went to university that some of my friends joined the church. They were super intrigued by me, this weird guy that was slightly older and had
weird things outside in his private time, and
life experiences that they were intrigued by. I took my friends to church dances, and actually one of my good friends joined the church. He started meeting with the missionaries completely separate from me. He was living in Wolverhampton, and he met the missionaries there, and then came to university one day and said, "So, will you baptize me in 2 weeks?"
Wow.
Yes, that would be fantastic.
Brilliant.
And so also be able to continue the work that I had learned as a missionary, but also then, just dive into whatever calling I was extended to and do my best. I don't know that if I did a very good job or not, but I did my best.
And I suppose the Lord knew you and knows you and knows what you need. And, obviously has given you those opportunities to serve in a capacity it's good for everybody else, but also is good for your spiritual development and for your family too.
Yeah, I mean, my first day at university, I had the decision and the choice to go to all the freshers activities, or to contact a young lady who had given me her number a couple of weeks before, who'd offered me a ride to a dance in Hyde Park. That young lady's name was Amanda, and she became my wife. We started dating and we got married. So I think the Lord, the reality is that there are always choices.
Yeah.
But the Lord has always provided the opportunities to make good decisions.
Yeah.
And it's been up to me to recognize those opportunities and to magnify those opportunities.
Fantastic. So talk about that then. So you had the opportunity to serve the mission. So let's go back. So you got to the mission home. 20. I'm still intrigued how 20 of you. It's the same mission home. It's on. You might have known it as Collington Road. For us, it was Spylaw Road. It's like in between roads. It's got 2 addresses and a roundabout. And we decided that Yeah, I'll know when I've made it in life when I've got a roundabout in my garden. That's my life goals.
That's the aim. That's the
That's the
goal there.
aim. Is that two entryways and a roundabout? Then then I know I've made it. So yeah, 20 people in there, fantastic. So you didn't. So talk us through. So you obviously get there. Talk us through who your trainer was, first area, and let's go from there.
So of course, in those first days, you go and you get assigned your trainer. My trainer was an elder called Elder McCurdy, who was from Idaho Falls in Idaho, and was this quite small guy with red hair and glasses. He was a really cool guy, and so my first area was Motherwell, and so that's kind of on the outskirts of Glasgow, and not regarded highly as a beautiful area or an area of anything noteworthy, really.
Maybe the crime rate. I know.
Yeah. Other than some fantastic people, I have to say. They had a nice branch there. They didn't have their own building, so they were in like a community hall or something like that. But my first apartment was an apartment in an area of Motherwell, which I don't think missionaries are even allowed in there anymore. And this was where we lived. It was a massive concrete block in a massive council estate, and the missionary apartment had been there for like 20 years. And so you can just imagine the state of this place. I was introduced to our apartment, which was a quite good size apartment or flat. But my bed consisted of 3 old mattresses that had been piled up on each other. That when I finally got onto the top bunk and rolled in, I kind of went into this huge crevice that was then almost impossible to climb out of in the morning, because all of the mattresses were just so destroyed. And to be honest, it just fulfilled every vision I had of what missionary life was like. As I dragged my bags from the bus stop to this wonderful apartment, the local kids were firing rockets at us because it was close enough to the bonfire night that they'd already got little rockets, and they were firing them at us from the other side of the road. And again, I was very, very horizontal, so I just thought this was really funny, and this was clearly what missionary life was all about. But interestingly, 2 weeks.
Were they called something?
What?
A name? So like you've got chavs.
No, they had not invented the word chavs when I was a missionary.
So by the time I got there, these people were called Neds. So obviously chavs is council house and violence. So Neds were the non-educated delinquents. And every Scottish person knew what a Ned was. They'd call them, the Neds over there, you know. And yeah, that's what they were, tracksuits and just little Scottish chavs.
we just called them cheeky kids. Yeah. They were definitely some cheeky kids. Yeah, it was a pretty dodgy looking place, to be honest. And I just thought, okay, this is missionary life. You know, we met up that evening with the zone leaders who were in a different area. And then they explained to me that actually we were only going to be living there for another 2 weeks. And then we were moving into an apartment together with the zone leaders in an area called Wishaw, which was actually a brand new flat that was absolutely gorgeous. So I went from pretty much the worst flat in the whole mission to suddenly the best flat in the whole mission in 2 weeks' time. So
nice.
So Motherwell was a very eye-opening and very different area to Harrogate, where I had grown up. You know, I grew up in London, and then I grew up in Harrogate, and now I was in the heart of Motherwell, which I always remember is regarded as the Emerald City, because there's so much smashed Buckfast glass all over the floor that the whole place is just littered with green glass, which is this. I'd never heard of Buckfast.
I'd forgotten about Buckfast.
But Bucky, it said made by monks for drunks.
Yeah.
So it's a sparkling wine made in a monastery by monks, but it was extraordinarily cheap and got people extremely drunk very easily. And this place was known as Emerald City. So there was some fantastic experiences there. It was a massive, like paradigm shift for me, like the amount of walking and going on buses, which had non-smoking signs all over them, but the driver and everybody else on there was smoking. So you come out of there feeling like you had lung disease. There was a massive, massive culture shock, I have to say. I have to say, the one thing I missed telling you was the first day that we arrived on my mission, they took us up to Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, and they invited us all to dedicate our mission at the top of Arthur's Seat, as Parley P. Pratt had done hundreds of years before. And I actually received a very, very kind of spiritual experience whilst trying to find a quiet spot where there was no tourists walking around and kneeling, and finding that kind of solitude to be able to just pour out my heart and dedicate myself to the Lord. The reality is I had a great experience that this is where the Lord wanted me, that there was a work to do, and that there was much that needed to be done. And I just needed to dedicate my life and crack on.
Yeah.
And so my attitude to missionary work was very much like, I'm here because I chose to be here. So I just cracked on. The experiences that came, whether they were, it was already getting pretty cold in Glasgow by that point, and there was some wild, wet, fairly rough days knocking doors and things, and in some areas that I would never ever go back to by choice. and in reality, I never got down. I never got homesick. People used to say, like, are you homesick? And I'd be like, no. I want to be here. I chose to be here. If I wanted to be at home, I'd be at home. And I think I was very blessed that way, that the Lord had just made it clear what I was there to do and what I needed to achieve, and that there was much to do. So I just got on with it. And I mean, like, yeah, there was a huge shift in my ability to just walk. The amount of walking that we did, the buses were so terrible, we ended up just walking everywhere. And like the arch on one of my feet collapsed after like 3 weeks, because my shoes, I was wearing Doc Martens because somebody had said missionaries need Doc Martens, but they were rubbish. And so I had like a foot injury, and it was pretty miserable and dark, and all the clocks had changed, so it was really dark all the time, and it could have been quite a depressing time. But I have to say, the experiences that we had teaching people, and the humility of the people, and the kind of beautiful personalities that we came across, just really, despite it probably, on reflection, being one of the harder areas on my mission, and also, for me, having to go through a very humbling experience, probably being a bit of a pain for my poor trainer, who himself was going through his own struggles and difficulties. It was probably one of the more challenging times on my mission, but I just remember wildly different experiences, and just even when I read my journal, just reflecting on how blessed I was to be there, and how grateful I was to be a missionary.
Just picking up on your point on the Arthur's Seat thing, that's a tradition that still holds true today. So when we were there, we went super early in the morning, and there was obviously nobody there, because nobody goes up on the seat at 6 o'clock. I think the odd dog walker. It's just because I don't know about you, we did it at the beginning of the mission as like a dedication, and then at the end of the mission as a reporting period. It's just a wonderful tradition that is so unique to Scotland, and everybody will have their own spiritual experience from that's so memorable. I've got a picture of a friend who served in Motherwell, and it's as you go into Motherwell, he stood next to the wall, and on the wall is graffitied about 25 foot long the word Murderwell. And so that's what Motherwell would be called throughout the entire mission. Nobody went to Motherwell, everyone went to Murderwell. And as you drive in from Glasgow to Motherwell, there's these just humongous, like it's like a village, isn't it, of just high rises, concrete high rises. And that's my enduring memory of I never served there, but that's my enduring memory of Motherwell. So yeah, bleak contract, but you're right, the people there, like diamonds in the rough.
Yeah, they were fantastic. I mean, yeah, we were teaching some wonderful people. We were having investigators coming to church. I mean, we taught, this one lady who was she had a little kind of 1-year-old boy, but her auntie was a member of the church in a different part of Scotland. She kind of had this influence and knowledge of the church, but her and her sister, we taught the gospel. They had incredible experiences, and I had grown up doing splits as a young man with the missionaries once a month, as a priest going on splits. I thought missionaries just knocked on doors and just got rejected. I thought that's all you did as a missionary. I didn't realize you actually went into houses and taught people. So this was a great revelation to me, when my companion's like, okay, we've got like 3 appointments today. I'm like, to do what? and so one of the hardest things I had to do on my mission was actually certify. We had to learn the missionary discussions. So you had to learn all of the principles and all of the scriptures, and you had to memorize all of it. And you had to certify each of the discussions. And we were pushed really hard at the beginning of our mission to learn all of that information in a very, within a month, you needed to certify. And my brain was not in a memorization state. I've been at art college for 2 years. I was chilling. And I found the intensity and the academic challenge of certifying and memorizing and learning a real challenge at the beginning of my mission. And my first mission president was President Swanee, who was actually from the same stake as me. He lived in York, but he was a native to Scotland. The most wonderful, humble human being you could ever meet, him and his wife. Fabulous. And he had spent a long time teaching the missionaries to humble themselves and to allow the Spirit in. And so it was a very, very obedient mission, like almost to an extreme. I got rebuked at my first zone conference because my jacket wasn't buttoned up. And this, it was like obedience to the letter sometimes. And so there was all of this change that I just had to try figure out and grasp and understand whilst trying to learn and memorize as I'm walking along to appointments and on buses and things. So I found that definitely a big challenge. We taught some beautiful, humble people. We also taught a guy who had studied anti-literature for many years, and just was a very, very clever academic. And we would turn up at his apartment, and he would just have this list every time we went there. And so he would just bombard us with stuff quite honestly and openly. He wasn't trying to catch us out. He just wanted to understand. But he would dive into things, and so I was learning at a rate of knots. Just the intensity of the learning for me was definitely hard. I had to humble myself and let the Lord take over on occasion, because I was definitely felt way out of my depth on many occasions. But it was a super first area. I was there for about 3 months. And then I was only with my trainer, I think, for 2 months. Then I had another missionary companion who was fantastic, taught me a lot. He became, I think he became an assistant to the president after that. He was a very, very good missionary. And so I learned a lot from him as well. So I considered that I was very well trained, because after those 2 very good missionaries, I then went to an area called Livingston, which you'll know. on the outskirts of Edinburgh, also known for its beauty and sizable council estates. But they had a fantastic ward in Livingston. They had their own building. They had a really good membership there. Was super people in the ward. We had a fantastic ward mission leader. So the work was really effective. My companion was the zone leader. He was really, really switched on. Elder Starr was his name, with 2 R's. And he was very clever, total scriptorian, was a genius pianist, which we used on many occasions. If anybody had a piano in their corridor, and when we knocked on their door, we were in. And he would just start ripping out like these pieces of incredibly complex recitals. Fabulous guy. And I was with him, I'd been lucky enough in Motherwell to teach and see a wonderful man baptized who was a member referral. He was living with some members called and so I'd seen this work from my first, really, really hard. We had a car, which was lovely because didn't have to rely on public transport. And we were tearing around, and I just loved Livingston. We lived in quite a nice apartment in this nicer part of Livingston, because actually there were some really nice parts of Livingston as well. And there was, great members there. There was also 2 sister missionaries in the wards. There was real missionary presence, and the members loved the missionaries. And so everybody we were teaching, we would just go and take a member with us when we would teach. The members would just embrace these people. And so we saw huge success there with families being baptized. We took a couple of families to church, and they got baptized entirely as a family. And so we saw great success there. And that was a really fabulous area. There was super people. And I considered actually after Motherwell that Livingston was a really nice area. People consequently tell me oh, sorry about that. People who are from Edinburgh always go, "Oh, you went to Livingston," and I'm like, really? I thought it was nice. And so that was a fantastic area. And from there, I then went actually to Dumfries, right on the borders of England. I was a whole 2 hours from my house.
That's still in the Edinburgh state, though, isn't it, Dumfries?
It is, yeah, right on the very south border. Yeah. And I was only there for just for one transfer, I think, just for 1 month. Was with an English companion who was a really good guy, but he was struggling quite a lot. He didn't really want to be the senior companion. So despite me being the junior companion, I think I was organizing most of our work and trying to forge ahead. Again, lovely ward, really big building in a beautiful area, and a fantastic ward. And we were able to teach and see some really good people baptized. A couple that had been being taught for a month or so before I got there. It was later in their life, their children had grown up and left home, and this couple were just wonderful, just fantastic. Both of them really humble, but they were, he was a successful man. He'd, had a lovely home and everything, but never been interested in religion in his entire life. His wife had always been interested in religion and investigated quite a few faiths. He had just dismissed it and I wanted nothing to do with it. It was this great big burly guy, and just had the most profound experiences that had humbled him and revealed to him the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon without him ever having intention. I think his intention was to try and prove it wrong, and to put the missionaries in their place, and invited them in almost just to taunt them. And of course, he'd read the Book of Mormon, put Moroni's promise to the test, and received a strong witness of the truthfulness of it. And so this couple were just an absolute pleasure to teach and to see come to church. And and within weeks of them coming to church, they were already starting to contribute to the ward, and the ward loved them. They were leaders, born leaders. And so this was also a wonderful experience for me.
So were you fairly in Dumfries? How close was that to Galashiels? That's got to be in the same district, right?
I don't remember actually.
Maybe
Dumfries.
Maybe Galashiels didn't have a ward. We had a Galashiels area.
Yeah.
I remember going, and they had this baptismal font that was under the floor. You'd pull out the little covers from the floor, and there's just this. That's how they baptize people. You just take the chairs out of the way, fill up the font, and away you go. Walk down into the little hole in the floor.
They had the same thing in Inverness.
Yeah.
Font under the floor in the chapel.
Yeah, I thought it's quite a clever little innovation. Quite good sense.
It was pretty intimidating for the poor person being baptized. Just had all these people stood around them. That was a little bit intimidating, I think, but yeah, practical nonetheless. A good use of space. That was a beautiful area, and Dumfries was a really gorgeous part of the country. It borders the Lake District. It's really lovely area, and like I say, also wonderful people, wonderful members, and again, it was a 4-man flat there. So most of my missionary apartments were 4-man flats.
So how many people were in the mission at that time?
I think it was about 180.
Okay, so when I was there, I think it was about 110 to 120. So it obviously reduced quite by the time I'd got there.
There was a lot of missionaries when I was out. And when I got there, I was one of like 5 English missionaries in the whole mission. There was a handful of Europeans. Vast majority were all American. And so I was a bit of a novelty to be an English guy serving in Scotland. And it was funny because I had grown up. So I was born and raised at the BYU Centre in central London.
Yeah.
So I grew up with 60 American students around me to the age of 10 or 9. And then I'd gone to Hyde Park ward anyway, which was also had a lot of Americans. And then I moved from London to Harrogate, which has an American Air Force base. So half the ward is American there. So my ability to kind of gel with the American missionaries and understand their culture and their background really wasn't difficult at all. It was fairly normal for me. But I think English missionaries were known as being quite difficult and sometimes a bit weird. And they used to refer to me as the normal English missionary.
That's fairly xenophobic.
Yeah, I know. And I was like, what do you mean normal English missionary? And then actually I met some of the other English missionaries and thought, oh, maybe they are weird. I was like, no, they are just a bit weird.
Yeah. So
I'd say, no, I am normal. And there's lots of other normal people, but unfortunately there's a couple that are a bit odd, but it was, I had lots of good companions. I consider myself as extremely well trained by very good missionaries, which I got along with really well. I learned something from every single one. And I, from that area, I was then I got the phone call and I was asked to become a senior missionary and a district leader in Drumchapel, Glasgow.
Oh, okay, right. You're getting some great areas here.
So what I realized is quite a lot of the areas I served in as a missionary don't have missionaries anymore because they're not allowed to go into those areas.
Drumchapel was open as an area when I was there. So I was, I'll put my podcast up before yours. So when I was there, I was zone leader in Glasgow for 10 months. And before that, I was a missionary in Bishopbriggs, which is still in the Julian Avenue, Glasgow ward, for 3 months. So I was in Glasgow ward for 13 months. Now, did Drumchapel have its own unit? Or was it?
No, it was part of Julian
Avenue.
Avenue.
Yeah. So they had Drumchapel. That was a rough area.
Yeah, but we lived in, we didn't live in Drumchapel. We were living in Bishopbriggs.
Oh, in Bishopbriggs.
Yeah.
Not nice.
So So we were living there and then just getting the bus into Drumchapel. Do you know what? It was a rough area. I mean, it was renowned for being a rough area, but I never had any problems there. And the members there were just fantastic. They were just awesome. And I mean, Drumchapel was the original building. So if you go to the community centre, it looks an awful lot like one of our church buildings. And that's because it was. Yeah. It was dedicated by David O. McKay. It was the original church building in Scotland. And at one point, like the whole of Drumchapel were members of the church. Like everybody just took their children to be baptized at 8 years old, whether they went to church or not, because that was the local church. Yeah. So we had so many people who knew the church, you know, had grown up with the knowledge of the church. And there was a lot of really strong members in Drumchapel who were, you know, really stalwart members in Glasgow ward. And but it was a polarizing area, because you had Drumchapel itself and then you had Bears Den, which was also our area, which is the poshest part of Glasgow. Yeah. So talk about the contrasts. And I loved that area. I absolutely loved that area. I had a couple of companions there that were both fantastic. For me, it was the first opportunity of being a leader, and you know, I had to learn a lot again and humble myself an awful lot again, and kind of learn how to try and drive forward a district and work with other missionaries. And yeah, I learned an awful lot. It was a fabulous area, and we taught and baptized some super people, but just loved working with the members there. They were just on fire. We had a guy called Joe, who were referred to as Baptizing Joe, because he had just gone through the biggest 180 of a lifestyle. I know Joe. You know Joe?
He was known to us as Temple Joe.
Yeah.
But you carry on and I'll tell you my experience with him.
So I met Temple Joe in the temple after my mission, but when I was there, he was Baptizing Joe. And he had been baptized not that long before, less than a year before. Huge shift in his lifestyle. I mean, full 180. And the reason we never had any problems there is because he just told everybody, one, the missionaries have got no money. So despite them being in suits, then they have nothing that is of any use to you. We didn't have phones in those days either. So we literally had nothing unless they wanted to steal a Book of Mormon. And he also just said, like, don't bother. he was extremely well connected with everybody, because he'd like grown up there his whole life and he knew everybody. And so we never had any problems. We were very, very lucky. We got chased by cheeky kids and bricks thrown at us and various things like that, you know, big pieces of wood with nails in them lobbed at our heads. But other than that, we were fine. And we had just the most fun down there. It was a really, really good area, which was in the Glasgow ward. And I was there for 3 months and then got moved to Bishop Briggs.
So go back to the Glasgow. So who was bishop at the time in Glasgow ward?
Oh gosh, now you're asking me. Oh. I don't remember his name.
So my experience with Temple Joe was similar to yours. So it wasn't my area, but we'd go there a lot on exchanges. And from what I understood, you might be able to correct me, was that he was fairly criminally involved in the area, and he was almost like the Don of Drumchapel. And
they called him the Godfather of Drumchapel.
Exactly, yeah. So so when I heard that I was going to go visit Temple Joe, and I walk in and he's just like tatted everywhere, his tats all over his arm, and his, you know, and then he's not what I expected Temple Joe to look like. And then the story of him being kind of like the mafia man, but he made sure that all the missionaries were looked after just by, I don't know how, but I think there was probably some threats in there for anybody that caused any harm to the missionaries. But he was fantastic, and he made that area just a really good area for the missionaries to be at. Never any trouble.
No, and not only did he make sure we didn't get into any trouble, because it really was a significantly dangerous area, but he would just teach everybody about the gospel. Yeah. I mean, he would just tell everyone. And he would just pull people to church every single Sunday. You know, you get on bus to get to church. and he'd always have somebody with him. He just dragged along, and he was incredible. We used to have cottage evenings at their home, like once a week, and family home evenings. I mean, him and his wife and Danny, who was his nephew, who lived down the road as well, and their family, and they were just the best people, just the best, the most humble people who had just gone through a life that I really could barely even associate with, to be honest. You know, the life that they had known was so different, but just loved the gospel, just did not take the gospel for granted in any way, like valued everything about the gospel and just lived the gospel like I'd never seen anybody live it. So great example to me.
Good people. And like you say, I was chatting to an old companion recently, and he just observed, and he's looking back, Scotland was just a very strangely violent place. And just like you say, it's just stuff would happen. He was just like, oh, that's normal. It's such, like you say, such a culture shift where you had these things thrown at you. With a missionary in Aberdeen called Elder Ford, and just for the very virtue that he was English, he had a brick thrown at him, and it just bust his face right open. But it just very violent place. But once you got past that, just great, phenomenal people. So go on, you went to Bishopbriggs. So I
went to Bishopbriggs
as well. That was my second area.
So I did 6 months in Bishopbriggs. So I actually did 9 months in the Glasgow ward. So I must say, I told you that I grew up in London, but I was born in Wales. And as a missionary in Scotland, this was a good thing.
The same kind of Welsh heritage. I'm not English.
there was more than one occasion where somebody was like this, ready to knock me out, and because I was English. And then I explained, I was actually born in Llangollen, Wales, and they were like, "Oh, it's all right then." On more than one occasion, that saved my skin. So the 8 months that I was born and raised in Llangollen, Wales, were well worth it for being a missionary in Scotland.
I just wanted to be American.
Yeah, they just thought you were American anyway.
They got
it was
just leave me alone.
It was good. I mean, I was 6 months in Bishopbriggs. I loved the Glasgow ward. I loved the people we taught and we worked with in Bishopbriggs as well. We had again a fantastic ward mission leader. You know, I was in a 4-man flat again. We were in a nice apartment. And so it was a really, really good area in Bishopbriggs.
Who is your ward mission leader? I'm asking you for names now. You may not remember.
Yeah, me and names, not a good thing. I don't know that. I think he left the ward actually not that long after I was there. He was quite a young guy who was a returned missionary himself. But he was, just because he was young, he was like still fresh. He was still a young single adult actually. And so he would do lots of work with us. Again, we would have lots of member support. I thought it was a fantastic area. So
you were in that area, the Roys would have lived pretty close to you then?
The Roys were there. We actually, one thing I remember doing was one evening we had just a little bit of time, and we had been going and working with quite a lot of the members, and I saw, you know, for me, I saw the most success from their mission, but from part member families. So we would go and teach and reactivate a whole family, and of course then they had children that had been born and never baptized, and we would just complete the family and baptize those children that had not been, and of course strengthen the ward as much as possible, because you're reactivating a whole family which has got built-in, you know, support for each other. So I saw a lot of success with working with non-members, but also then finding out which of those people through the members needed to be contacted. So we did quite a lot of that, as well as knocking on doors and doing all the rest of it. We were doing lost sheep program in those days and everything else. You'll know the gardeners in Glasgow ward. So he was the chief, like a police constable or chief of the police force, and he was actually English, and his wife was from Glasgow, and they were a great family. They had I think 3 or 4 daughters. And the interesting story is they had not had missionaries in their home for quite a few years. In fact, our area book said, do not contact the gardeners. And that I would go to church on a Sunday and see this fantastic family and think, how on earth is the missionaries not working with them? I think historically, some slightly overconfident, overcocky missionary had said something to Brother Gardiner that he did not like.
Yeah.
And one of the missionaries ended up against a wall. And so anyway, I said, I don't care what it says in the area book. I'm giving these are good people. I'm going to give them a call. And of course, they welcomed us with open arms, invited us round for dinner. And we started to go and visit with the gardeners quite a lot. We actually started teaching one of the daughter's boyfriends who was coming to church. And actually, the oldest daughter, who was really super, actually, when I was at university, ended up in Coventry Ward. And so I was able to invite her over, and we fed her in our home. When I was married to Mandy, with our first home, she was in Coventry Ward. And so she said, like, nobody had been to our house. No missionaries had been to our house. And ever since you started coming, missionaries never left. They were always in our home. Because of these girls were fantastic missionaries. Yeah, I think they knew exactly why. They knew exactly why.
And we just don't know why.
He was just a very straight down the line guy, and I can imagine some overexcited missionaries said something they shouldn't have, and that caused a problem. But they were fantastic. As a family, they were absolutely brilliant. And she said, like, missionaries were in our home 3 times a week after you left, and that influenced her to kind of want to go and serve a mission as well. So there were some wonderful things. I loved that ward. And yeah, 9 months. I mean, they pretty much gave me a home teaching list before I left, because they considered me a member of the ward. It sounds like you were in a similar situation.
Yeah, I was there for over a year. That's
a
good chunk. So if I throw some names out there, you tell me if you know them. So we had our bishop at the time was Bishop McLaughlin. He would have been.
I did recognize that.
Yeah. So he's Bishop McLaughlin. Obviously, we had the Roys, like Sandy Duncanson.
Yes, the Duncan.
Yeah, you remember the Duncansons. Obviously, we spoke about Temple Joe. The Greers. He was like he would have been there for forever. Quite a short chap. Bit grumpy sometimes. If he doesn't.
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah, quite a few of them are a bit grumpy. But there's some great people there. So.
Super people, and to be honest, we would turn up. There was, I think, 7 missionary companionships when I was in that ward.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 14 missionaries, but we would go into every auxiliary and do missionary minutes every week. And of course, 7 companionships and missionaries, we were bringing a lot of people to church. It was almost like insane. It was a different ward every week because we were bringing so many people to church. I have to say, the way that the ward responded to that, and the warmth and the kind of the love that they expressed to everybody we brought, I thought was fantastic.
Which is really weird. Something had happened between the time that you were there and the time that I was there. So for the mission president before my mission president was a guy called President Breens, and I think there'd been some kind of falling out between the mission and the state, particularly Glasgow Ward, and they had 2 missionaries there for a good year and a half. That's it. Now, if you know what the catchment area is for the Julian Avenue Ward. It must be maybe a fifth to a quarter of the whole of Scotland.
Yes,
yeah. They had 120 missionaries in the whole of Scotland. A fifth of them was in this one unit, and they had 2 missionaries in there. And so when I was there for the first time, we'd gone from 2 missionaries to 12 missionaries, and we just flooded that ward, and it was just like a massive, humongous charm offensive. And they were not used to, which, hearing from what you're saying, you had 7 companionships and they were really used to having all these. It took them a good time. So I saw the progress because I was there for so long. It took them a good year or so to get used to the missionaries being there, being active in missionary work, and to receiving all these new people that were coming in. So it's nice to know that it got back to where you had it, I suppose. Where perhaps that they weren't having that attention for a while.
No, it was great. And everybody we brought, we had the font filled most weeks, and there was baptisms happening on a regular basis, and fabulous people though that were joining the church, and yeah, there was great experiences there. I have fantastic memories of Glasgow Ward,
Jim
and
Loftus,
the work that was done.
Jim Loftus, was he there when you were there?
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Jim Loftus, good chap. Okay, good. So you're in Bishopbriggs.
Yeah, and then I spent the rest of my mission in Inverness. So I went from a district leader in Drumchapel, then to Bishopbriggs, because then I was the zone leader there. So for me, that was a really easy-ish transition, because I knew the ward and I knew a lot of the people. And then we had a time, I had great companions there as well. And I then went up to Inverness for the rest of my mission, and spent 7 months in Inverness. Yeah. So I did 9 months in Glasgow, and then I went and did 7 months up in Inverness. Inverness is a really beautiful area. And of course, I was zone leader up there, which meant I covered like almost the whole of the north of Scotland.
Yeah.
Which included Stornoway and the Orkneys.
Yeah.
And so it was a wonderful area, because I just got to go and travel around the whole of the north of Scotland, go on a 4-hour ferry to go and interview someone for baptism. And it was just crazy. But beautiful area, very different to Glasgow, beautiful historic old little town with the river. And again, there was a lovely ward there and a fantastic bishop, really welcoming. There was a set of sisters there, and there was the elders as well. And we just got really, really involved with the ward. We were organizing ward activities, and there were some members that were just fantastic. And the 7 months there was really amazing. We saw incredible success finding and teaching just wonderful people, either just by knocking on doors or street contacting or through the members. And we saw great success. And again, some really good people joined the church, people who had been searching for their whole lives. I remember sitting down with a woman who ended up joining the church. She was very academic, very clever woman, and had studied multiple religions throughout her lifetime. And we just knocked on her door and started to teach her. And we taught her the plan of salvation. And I remember her stopping, just saying, stop. Like, we got to the end of this, we used the little cutouts of the guy of the spirit, and then, you got the little pictures, and we're doing all these little cutouts for this highly academic, intelligent woman. And she just went, are you trying to tell me that, she was probably in her 50s at this point. She's saying that 2 19-year-old kids have just taught me the meaning of life.
Yeah.
And we were like, yes.
With the little cutouts.
Yeah, with our little cutouts that I'd made and laminated, and I just kind of went, yeah. But the spirit was just so strong. It just backed up the truthfulness of what we were testifying of and what we were sharing, despite being 2 stupid 19-year-old kids, or I may have been 20 by that point. But we were kids. She had children that were older than us. So this was almost insane for her. But there was just really her and multiple others, just fabulous people who were able to come to church. Again, he welcomed and really felt part of the ward, but contributed to the ward. Immediately, people that were being baptized, and they had calling the next week, and they were running primary, and they were contributing, and it was summertime while I was there, and so we just had this fantastic summer. We did tons of activities there, and like I said, we really got to know the ward very, very well. We were doing musical items and talks on a monthly basis, but just ever so connected to the growth of the church in that area.
So, fun fact for you: I think the Inverness Chapel was Thomas S. Monson's favorite building in the entire church.
Is that right?
What he said. I believe him.
I mean, it's like on the river, in the most perfect location, really beautiful spot. And I remember the bishop used to have this ride-on lawnmower, and the bishop used to just cut the grass because it was just really immaculately kept and looked after, and a beautiful area. And there's some really, our ward mission leader was a guy who was retired, but they'd served a couple's mission in Manchester, and they were good, proper stalwart members.
Was there a guy there called Bertie Bubbles?
I don't remember a Bertie Bubbles, and I'm pretty sure I would have.
So there's a chap in Inverness who became a bit of a mission legend called Bertie Bubbles. Now, he might have been baptized after you were there, but it's an old chap that was just full of character, very charismatic chap. But no Bertie Bubbles in your
there. There were great members there, and again, I consider myself very lucky because I spent a lot of my mission with a car. I spent 13 months solid in a car, and so I was able to just avoid the horror of public transport and walking, and we were able to just get so much work done. And you know, I consider Scotland as a country of extremes. It had some horrifying things going on, but I think it also had the best people that I've ever met.
Yeah,
just probably the greatest and the worst people I've ever met.
Yeah.
And it is somewhat of an extreme place, but I think the members for me were just a phenomenal example of living the gospel. You know, they weren't just cruising. There was no cruise control. I remember going and interviewing a woman on Stornoway, who had again actually tried. She was quite anti, and she tried to prove the missionaries wrong. And in trying to prove the missionaries wrong, had of course received a witness that it was true. And so I was interviewing this woman, and she said, "Oh, yeah, I'll lose my job, and I'll be pretty much cast out from everybody I know." And I said to her, like, and you know, she was joining a small branch in Stornoway of like 20 people, which met in a porter cabin on somebody's land in their back garden. It was really, and I said to her, like, so why? She said, well, it's true. So if it's true, it's true.
Yeah.
Now I have to get on with it. You know, it was nothing simple about living the gospel for her. This was a massive sacrifice. And a lot of the members were in a similar scenario. Now, there was nothing easy about being a member of the church. There was no cruise control, but they lived it. They lived it and they loved it. And I think that was what I learned to appreciate so much, just that how wonderful and dedicated the members of the church were, and how much they fought to live the gospel and to be a member of the church. It was not easy. You know, a lot of the kids were going to like Catholic schools and stuff and getting persecuted by teachers, let alone the rest of the kids. And so it was nothing easy about being a member of the church, but they just loved the Lord. They loved the gospel of Jesus Christ. And there were people there that I've had to give a lot of talks over a long period of time as a leader. And, you know, I often refer to people that I met on my mission because they just had such an impact on me. And I'm horrific with names. And I rarely remember people or anything from my history because I'm always looking forward to the next challenge. but there are people that my children know by name. In fact, I was speaking to my oldest daughter, who's in the States, on the phone, FaceTiming with her whilst I was flicking through some photographs, because you made me pull out all my old missionary box, you see. And so I'm flicking through pictures, and she's like, and I actually said, "Oh, fantastic, I have a picture of Agnes." Now, Agnes was a member in Motherwell, my first area. And the missionaries had knocked on her door while she was on her deathbed. And her husband had said, "I'm not interested, but if you can heal my wife, you'll have somebody that will come to church." Because she was riddled with cancer, absolutely riddled head to toe with cancer. And the missionaries went in and gave her a blessing, and she was healed and stood up, and was this incredible stalwart member who considered that she should be dead. So she was going to spend every living minute of her life serving the Lord.
Yeah.
And she would feed every Saturday night. She would feed all of the missionaries in the local area. So she would have 4 to 6 missionaries at least every Saturday. They weren't wealthy people in any way, but she would feed us, and every investigator, and this was a tough woman. she was a broad woman, and she was a tough cookie, and she had not by any means had a simple or easy life. And she would just embrace physically any investigator we brought to church, and just pick up full-grown men and spin them around. And and
Scottish
like,
girl.
oh, just the most fantastic person, and just like was just this phenomenal example of living the gospel every minute of your life. And so I tried to emulate some of those qualities, and I think I tried to learn something from all of these people that I met, as well as the people that we were able to teach. And I tried to pick up qualities that I've tried to add to my own personality in the way that I live the gospel, and have tried to live the gospel since returning from a missionary, which I think is the power of a mission. It's not just what you do on your mission, it's what you do with what you learned when you get home.
Yeah. So that's a nice whistle stop tour through your mission. So I think that missions, you've got these 18, 19, 20, well, I guess it's 19, 20 when we were serving, you're all kids really, and you put them in a situation that they would never ever be in any other walk of life ever, meeting people you would just never meet, and just doing, looking back, it just felt like it was 2 years of doing some like crazy things and crazy things happening. So have you got any stories? What's kind of your funniest stories, or some of the crazier things that happened to you, just where you just look back and think, what on earth happened there?
My wife tells me that I only remember good things. I don't have a memory for negative, to be honest. I have quite a rosy view on most things, and I tend to not dwell on anything that's not. I remember experience of being chased quite a lot, having fireworks thrown at me, and having bricks thrown at me. I remember I lived in Milton.
Milton and Campsie.
Yeah, Milton just outside Glasgow.
Yeah, Milton and Campsie. I know it well. Yeah.
Yeah. So Bishop Briggs. We lived in Milton.
You get on the bus and go further up. It's like an hour, half an hour, 45 minutes or so to Milton.
Yeah. So that second part, so there's only the area in Glasgow. The apartment was again a long time old apartment in the middle of Milton, and I remember this area was not great at all. It was not the best street. In fact, one of my childhood friends that I'd grown up with actually moved up to Scotland, and he said like, I want to come and visit you. want to come and say hello. He was like my best friend growing up, who had also had the missionary discussions. And I said, yeah, like, here's my address, come and see us. And he's like,
Not
I'm
good.
not going there. He's like, what? I'm not parking my car there. And so we had this car, this little beat up Vauxhall Nova, which had been broken into so many times that we just didn't even bother locking the doors. The locks actually were just hanging out of the doors because they'd just been punched so many times and opened. Because there's nothing ever in it to steal, because we had nothing. Again, unless you wanted a box of Book of Mormons. So we worked Milton quite a lot. And there was, again, fabulous people there that we met and taught and joined the church and what have you. But there was a time where I came out to go to the car, normal morning. We came out of our apartment and we went to where we parked the car outside of our apartment, and there was no car there. And so I looked at my companion and just said, "Where's the car?" And he just started laughing. And he's like, "Good one." And I'm like, "No, really, where's the car?" He's like, "Yeah, good one." I said, "No, I parked the car here yesterday and I have not moved it as a practical joke." And he's like, "What?" So anyway, we got onto the police, and we reported the fact that our car was missing. And they said, "We're going to send some officers around to see you in a minute." And they turned up and they said, "Yes, we've got your car. It's a write-off because a lad who's about 5 doors up decided to steal it and go for a joyride and met a police car whilst he was joyriding, got chased, decided to jump out of the car, leave it running and moving, and then it had totaled a wall." And this kid, it was his third strike. It was his third offence. So I then had to go to the Glasgow Crown Court to testify that I had not given this guy permission to take our car, because they were going to send him down for this offence, because it was a long series of events. So I found myself as a missionary teaching in a Crown Court why I was a missionary and what I was there to do, which of course I capitalized on the opportunity of a captive audience.
Fantastic, yeah.
Got in the 4 principles. We didn't manage to start and close with a prayer, but we got in the 4 principles required for a discussion.
And then could you put that in your planner and say, "Yeah, I've taught a lesson today"?
Absolutely. We taught wherever we were going. We were teaching.
I taught 12 people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so and then of course had to just answer the simple question of, did you give this young man permission to take your car? No, I did not.
That's dangerous. And you get the family having retribution issues there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it didn't result in anything, fortunately, but yeah, I was a little bit concerned about the aftermath of our neighbors up the road. But anyway, it was fine. But yeah, that was an interesting experience that led to a scenario I didn't think I was ever going to find myself in as a missionary, standing in Glasgow Crown Court, in the full experience in the box and everything, testifying and swearing on the Bible. But just one of those extreme experiences that my mission was full of. But of course, you just look back and just think, what a crazy, wonderful time.
Yeah.
And for me was very much the springboard for the rest of my life. I've just had, as you know, my son Kieran just 2 weeks ago returned from his mission in German-speaking Alpine mission. He was 18 when he went on his mission. He's now back as a 20-year-old. And, I look at his experiences and I realized very, very early on his mission, which started in lockdown during a pandemic, that nothing I had to tell him from my mission was particularly relevant to him, or the way that he was going to do missionary work. But what he does with those experiences when he returns, is the way that you can use those experiences as a springboard. And of course, over the 9 years as a stake president, I got to set apart a lot of missionaries and release a lot of missionaries. And I found that a very sacred responsibility, where you again start to talk about, okay, so you've had this incredible experience, but now what?
Yeah.
And for me, it's much less about what you accomplished in the 2 years, much more about what you're going to do with those experiences for the rest of your life, and how they're going to shape you and shape the way that you live the gospel. And so, when I reflect, I've said a few times, I'm not very good at looking backwards. I'm not very good at staying in contact with people. I did meet some people in the temple from my mission, and including somebody that I baptized. And in fact, I met one of the people from Inverness a year or two after my mission, and then he said, "Oh, we need more missionaries like you. The people you baptized stay."
Yeah.
and I had to say, well, thank you very much. It's a lovely compliment. You have to realize that's everything to do with you and nothing to do with me.
Yeah, of course.
My job was to teach and baptize. Whether they stayed active was not, I realized I was not one to judge. I taught people and saw people baptized that I thought, wow, if they're here in a year, that would be a miracle.
Yeah.
And they were. And then I taught and baptized people who I thought were the future bishops and stake presidents, and fell away quite quickly. And I realized it's not my job to judge. This is the Lord's work. We're here to do a job and to do everything we can to help and to teach, but everybody has agency, and so don't bother judging, and just teach everybody equally.
Yeah.
And so I learned some good lessons. I think my mission shaped my personality, it shaped who I am, shaped the way I live the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the way that I keep my covenants. And so it was a very sacred experience to me, and one that I love and look back on with only fondness.
Yeah. Fantastic. And as we've said, it's just one of those strange things where, like you say, you've had rockets thrown at you, you've had your car stolen, you'd had being chased, and yet you sent your 18-year-old son. Well, obviously it was his decision, but you were happy and supportive in sending him to that kind of thing. And for me, I am 100% supportive of my future son having that experience, not because, of course, I don't want him to be placed into violent situations, but just it is completely worth it. The way a mission sets up your life, the skills that it gives you, the grounding in the gospel, they're just lessons and experiences that you cannot get, in my opinion, any other way.
No, absolutely not. There are lessons that I learned very early as a missionary, which have stayed with me for the rest of my life. I refer to them regularly. The one thing I always used to tell missionaries when I was preparing missionaries or interviewing them before they would go, and I was not easy as a stake president. You had to qualify for me to put your papers in. You had to prove that you were going to be a good missionary, because I had no intentions of sending rubbish missionaries out on their missions. And one of the things I would say is you need to come back from your mission and tell me that you have no regrets.
Yeah. That
you've done everything you can do. You spent every moment, every minute doing everything you could possibly do to teach the gospel and to strengthen the church. And I said, and that's your goal, to have no regrets. And I only have one regret from my mission. When I was a greenie in the first month, I walked past a house. I was walking much slower than my companion because he was walking like lightning, and I hadn't got used to that concept yet. So he was out ahead of me. I was trying to catch up, and the Spirit said, "There's a house on the left. You need to go and knock on that door." And I just thought, "Oh no, surely that's not right." we were going to an appointment. We were late already, which is why my companion was charging off and ahead of me. And I ignored it. And I went back to that house like days later, and it was an incredible family in there. But the dog nearly ate us when we were at the door, and the timing was all wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't know what would have happened if I'd have been obedient to that, or whether it was just a lesson I needed to learn. But I decided I was never going to question the Spirit. And so if the Spirit said, stop the car, park up, go and stop that person and chat to them, I did it. I never questioned the Spirit. And the Spirit prompted me, I just did whatever it was, because I never intended to regret not having followed the Spirit and what I might have missed out. I might have missed out on teaching and baptizing an incredible family, and that was the chance. Even though I went back, nothing happened and nothing came of it. But I just decided very quickly that will not happen again. And so I just learned not only to listen to the Spirit, but to recognize it and to be obedient to it. And that, I think, has shaped the way that I have served in most of my callings. Just to act on the Spirit, to never question it, and to have no regrets. The Lord prompts you to do something, just get on with it, and just crack on. And so, there was just one regret I had as a missionary, but I don't know if that was just a lesson I needed to learn, but it stayed with me and still stays with me today.
And that's the only lesson you learn from a mission. It's a pretty good lesson to learn.
Oh, I learned a lot more than that, but that's just one of them.
Right. So, as part of our Crewe Missionary Experiences podcast, it's now on you to shout out who's going next. You can be more than one person. Who would you like to hear from next?
I would like to hear from John Kidd.
John Kidd. I've heard a few of John Kidd's stories, and they are pretty funny.
Well, he served in our mission, he served in our stake.
I think he was in Birmingham Mission when our stake was in Birmingham.
Yeah, but he served in Telford Ward.
That's right.
Which is where he met his wife.
Hey,
so I think it would be.
My wife served in Crewe Ward. I'm not saying anything.
Hey.
Good. Anybody else you'd like to hear from?
Jared Lucas.
Yeah. Give you three. Go for the third one.
And I think Dave Lear.
Dave Lear. Excellent. Right. I think next we've got Andy Fisher, and then we'll get on to John Kidd, Jared Lucas, and Dave Lear. Yeah,
there's so many to choose from in our ward. We're very lucky.
Yeah, I was looking. We have over 20 return missionaries, easy peasy.
Yeah, and I tell you, Luke Smith. Now that's going to be an interesting one.
Okay, on there as well.
He served in the Ukraine.
Yeah, and we've had Isaac Dale, who was in China. So we've got some interesting ones coming up. But I'm looking forward to hearing some of those stories.
I'd love to hear about Isaac Dale's experiences. Actually, I've not quizzed him enough about his mission.
Yeah, well, you'll hear it. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. We love you, and thank you for sharing your time and your experiences, and being the first one on the Jack and Zach ripoff, the Crewe Ward missionary memories.
Well, thank you. I feel very honoured to be the first.
Yeah, and hopefully it's kind of stirred up some good memories and been a really good opportunity. You say you're a forward look at, you're a futurist, but hopefully it's been nice to go back and just have a think about some of those companions you served with, those people that you were around, and just almost some of those kind of those educational experiences that happened at the beginning of your life, those things that set you up for all the leadership that came afterwards.
Yeah, and will yet come. I look forward to not only sending my children on missions, but being able to serve a mission with my wife one day as well.
Would you choose Scotland again?
I would go to Scotland in a heartbeat.
There you go. I would go somewhere warmer.
I would also go somewhere else. But and now it's Scotland and Ireland, which I just think just blows my mind how that works. But yeah, I would absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you again. We'll get this up in the next couple of weeks, and yeah, we'll go for those ones that you've called out. But I've really enjoyed hearing your experiences, and hopefully you can share these with all those people that you've not kept in touch with all that time.
You never know. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Christian.
Take care.
Cheers. Thanks.
Bye.